We're here to pump you up. If you're not fired up after this week's episode of Michigan Podcast, you're the walking dead. Stay tuned.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anderson. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again.
Schultz just before Brazil got him.
And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
The MVP in today's ball game. You want to know who it is? I'm standing alongside his granddaddy, the quarterback Brian Greasy of Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Dace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. And hey, a couple of housekeeping items from the outset here, because last week we had by far our most viewed episode yet here on YouTube. Specifically, can't thank you enough. Want to thank Chris Ballas from the Wolverines, because I know he had something to do with that as well. He dropped a lot of knowledge on us, brought a lot of new faces and people to our channel here on YouTube, and then our friends and partners at Detroit Sports Podcast as well really helped give us a bounce getting the word out on last week's episode. So thank you to everybody that watched and made that happen. And along those lines, you know, the season's just around the corner. We're somewhere over 800 subscribers right now on YouTube. Let's see if we can get that over 1,000. Push us over 1,000 before we get to game week with next week's episode. That's right. Next week's episode, we'll have a Florida Gator analyst on with us. It's game week already. Help us to get over 1,000 subscribers right here on YouTube. Click like on this video, subscribe on our channel, and you can do the same with the audio version as well on Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher. And then finally, we launched this last week. A lot of you have asked, hey, how can we get more content? How can we support what you guys are doing? We can go to our Patreon page, Michigan Podcast, on Patreon. You can just support us with any amount that you think the show is worth. But if you would like to be a regular contributor for $5 a month on our Patreon account at Michigan Podcast, you'll get exclusive access to our Game Day Reaction podcast that'll begin September 2nd following the Florida game, as well as my weekly college football picks against the spread across the country, not just Michigan and the Big Ten. We'll give you exclusive access to those two things via Patreon if you support us here at Michigan Podcast. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Visit our website.com if you ever miss anything we say or publish. All of it is archived on our website at michiganpodcast.com. So here's the deal with this week's episode. We've done all the hardcore analysis. I don't know what else we could do. I mean, we've taken you inside training camp the last 2 weeks with representatives of the two big Michigan sites, Michigan Insider on Scout, the Wolverine on Rivals. There's no more analyzing to do, as the great prophet Keith Jackson used to say. Analyzing is paralyzing. So what we're going to do this week is get you fired up for the start of the season. voice of the Michigan Wolverines, Jim Brandstatter, is going to join us here later on in the episode. Your Twitter poll results of your favorite opening games in recent memory for Michigan football. We're also going to answer this week's question of the week, and then we've got some video from a Florida practice, Florida's quarterbacks. Oh, boy. Yikes. That better not be true. All that and more coming up later in this week's episode, but we begin with our attempt to get you ready and fired up for the season to come. I have ranked what I believe in my time as a fan are the 5 greatest game intros for a Michigan football game that I can remember. And I've been a fan since I was 10 years old in 1983. We're going to count them down all the way to number 1, beginning with this one.
Familiar stage. For Michigan and the Big Ten, another chance to play out their yearly quest for excellence. Washington, a 3rd consecutive trip to the Rose Bowl. And hanging in the balance for the Huskies, a chance to etch their name into Rose Bowl history. And the play is coming up next. You are looking live at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California. Back in the early 60s, the Rose Bowl was the first college football game ever broadcast nationally in living color. And for thousands of youngsters who grew up playing the game in that era, this is where they dreamt of playing on New Year's Day. The Rose Bowl, football's original field of dreams. ABC Sports welcomes you to the Rose Bowl. The winners of the Big Ten and the champions of the Pac-10.
ABC Sports there with that call from the 1993 Rose Bowl. Little clever play on William Shakespeare, A Rose by Any Other Name. The play's The Thing, in which I'll catch the conscience of the king, and other nerdy literary references there. Michigan and Washington, a rematch of the previous year's Rose Bowl when they were both ranked in the top 5. Washington was playing for a national championship. Michigan with an outside shot at a national title as well if it could win, but it was no contest. Huskies simply had too much athleticism, too much speed, and they suffocated Michigan that day. And so pretty much the same thing was expected the next year when they met in the Rose Bowl again. But Gary Moeller, very underrated offensive tactician. He adjusted his offensive scheme for Washington's aggressive blitz defense, hit Tony McGee for a couple of quick hitters over the middle to take advantage of open spaces created by Washington's blitzing linebackers. And of course, the hero, Tyrone Wheatley, setting at the time a Rose Bowl rushing record in that game with a display of power and speed, the likes of which we have seen from very few running backs, especially Michigan running backs, up until that point of time. So that's number 5 on our countdown of greatest game intros in modern Michigan football history. Here's number 4.
It takes great resolve, great determination, and great courage, because you know that there's going to be adversity in the process of achieving either goal.
Howard, touchdown!
When it starts getting tough, you have to dig in deeper. The ice picks for us symbolizes that every man has to dig in deep and find some kind of way to get to the summit.
Down the middle, wide open, touchdown!
Who depended on the people that tried to climb Mount Everest with him. He trusted them with his life. I trust each and every one of my teammates, and they trust me with winning a Big Ten championship.
Intercepted!
This is our opportunity to show everyone that Michigan is back as a true power.
They are relentless.
The air is very thin. You know, we're going to have to suck up the pain. We're going to have to get together to reach the top of this mountain. This team, the men and the coaches, the summit is November 22nd.
And each one of the Michigan players were issued their own pick as they pondered their plight and their way through the season, and so far, so good. But those are the Ohio State Buckeyes knocking on the front door, and they come in with a world of incentive to knock the Michigan Wolverines off their unbeaten season. The world knows that Ohio State has come to this game the last 2 years undefeated and lost. Only one loss this year, ranked number 4 in the nation. They have rolled big numbers since that 4-point loss over at Penn State, and right now the Bucs believe they can play with anybody. Well, we are about to find out. So from Ann Arbor, we swing over to New York City and spend some time with our folks in the warm studio.
That, of course, the legendary 1997 Michigan-Ohio State game under a cold, gray November sky. The Wolverines finished undefeated once again. That was a tremendous game. Charles Woodson won himself a Heisman Trophy that day, both what he did on offense, defense, and special teams. In that intro, you heard the names of Glenn Steele, Chris Howard, Brian Griese, Sam Sword, Eric Mays, names that have gone down in the annals of Michigan football, and of course, the coach, Lloyd Carr, who wanted to rally a program that had been stuck and mired in 4 lost seasons to aim higher, to play tougher, to play more together. And he used the legendary story of what happened in the book Into Thin Air to motivate his team, to climb a schedule that all the preseason magazines said was impossible. Michigan's 11 games, 9 of them would be played against teams either ranked or were in bowl games the previous season, beginning with the home opener against Colorado, who was Sporting News' preseason #1 team. Yet at the end of the season, one team stood above the rest, climbing the summit, and it was the Michigan Wolverines. Number 3 on our countdown of greatest modern Michigan game intros is next.
Their proximity made it inevitable that Michigan and Notre Dame would be football rivals. They first met on the gridiron in Notre Dame's initial season of football almost 120 years ago. From that point on, the two programs' fortunes would be intertwined, each developing its own rich tradition. Yost, Schembechler, Howard, and Woodson, the equal of Rockne, Parsegian, Gipp, and Hornick. To this day, Michigan and Notre Dame stand atop the list of all-time college football wins. Now with the victors and the victory march echoing through the stadium, Michigan and Notre Dame add another chapter to their storied rivalry.
Man, if that doesn't get your blood pumping, all right, someone check your pulse. That's a phenomenal intro by NBC Sports for the 2006 Michigan-Notre Dame game. You'll recall Charlie Weiss all but predicting a Notre Dame victory in that game. Irish ranked number 2 in the country with Brady Quinn at quarterback. Michigan came in off a disappointing 7-5 2005 campaign. Wolverines, though, came in and they just stomped them. They just opened a can. I mean, they built a woodshed out behind Touchdown Jesus and took the Irish back there and just whipped them some. Just broke their foot off the entire afternoon, won by almost 30 points in that game. A dominant performance by the Wolverines, announcing that the 2006 team wasn't going to play itself like they did back in 2005. And the Wolverines rode that win that day over the Irish all the way, that momentum, all the way to an 11-0 start, heading into that phenomenal 1-2 showdown versus Ohio State to close out that season. Here's number 2 on our list of greatest game intros in modern Michigan football history.
When the last glow drifts away from the big house at Michigan, it's a good time to have a seat and listen. Hear Yost, Kipke, Chrysler, and in your mind's eye see the lads who wore the colors. Harmon, who played both ways all the way to a Heisman Trophy and got a standing ovation once at the Horseshoe. And Archie Griffin, the double Heisman man from Ohio State, who had his moments. So many to remember, players and coaches. But there are 2 coaches who had a special place in this history, Woody and Bo, the salt and pepper of the series. Giants in their profession, their histrionics legendary. And they could win. This is a remarkable festival annually, whether here or at the Horseshoe. There the great bands fight that team across the field. Show them Ohio's here. Hail to the victors valiant. Hail to the conquering heroes. Today, another bounty of memories, concluding 100 years of Buckeyes and Wolverines.
You knew we had to hear the great voice of the legendary Keith Jackson at least one more time on this countdown. That from the 100th meeting ever between Michigan and Ohio State, the 2003 game in Ann Arbor. Ohio State comes in number 2 in the country. Michigan playing for an outright Big Ten championship, and they pull off the upset that day over Jim Tressel's Buckeyes. In fact, hard to believe, 2003, 2 of my 3 children weren't yet born. My teenager was only 2. That's the last time we beat the Buckeyes in a game when it really, really mattered. When a lot was on the line for both teams. That's the last time. That's the last outright Big Ten championship that Michigan won as well. And that brings us now to number 1. And this is a game, I know it chapter and verse. It's one of the games forged in to my childhood. First of all, what you're about to see in a moment, I think this is the best intro for a college football game I've ever seen, like ever. And it's even more impressive when you realize that this is over 30 years ago, right? And so the music, the graphics, the animation, a lot of that stuff was in its infancy or not even being used back then that we take for granted now. And even now, 30 years later, it holds up with today's more advanced technology. And it's a game that has its own subplot because a certain quarterback promised before it began that his team, Michigan, was going to go down there to the Horseshoe in Columbus, that he guaranteed they were going to win. That kid, of course, is now the coach. His name is Harbaugh. And number 1 on our countdown, this phenomenal intro from CBS Sports to the 1986 Michigan and Ohio State game.
One is a legend. The other may someday be. Today they are merely the focal point of the bitter rivalry between 2 states. The Wolverines are led by Jim Harbaugh, a devastating improviser. But only the tip of a varied attack. This team is dangerous from anywhere on the field at any time. The Buckeyes, too, are explosive. Their leader is Jim Carsados. He likes the quick kill and Chris Carter. On the ground, these Bucks can also deliver a knockout punch. Team defense. That's the Wolverine motto. No man is bigger than the team. Know your assignment. Swarm to the ball. Together, this group can be an awesome force. Ohio State's defensive warrior is Chris Spielman. Solitary in purpose, yet united in a simple goal. Give no quarter for 60 minutes. Proudly, Spielman stands as a symbol of the Buckeye battle cry. Two champions, one true test. One game, one victor. The setting for our one-game test. Ohio Stadium, Columbus, Ohio. There will be nearly 90,000 folks on hand this afternoon. And our weather conditions today are absolutely glorious for this confrontation. The Big Ten Championship. Michigan and Ohio State. And they've decided the title 17 times since '44. And in those 17 games, the Buckeyes have won 8, lost 7 to Michigan, and 2 games have wound up in ties.
But on that day, Michigan would even the score and get the win 26-24 over Ohio State, despite falling behind early largely to Chris Carter's heroics, coming back with a strong second and third quarter, and then holding on in the fourth as Matt France. Was it France or Frats? France. Can't remember his last name. It was Matt something. Shanked the kick for Ohio State that would have won that game for the Buckeyes. Wolverines ran out the clock, won the Big Ten championship, lived up to Jim Harbaugh's guarantee that they would win. And Bo recalled from that game that they had dominated Ohio State for the last second half of the game, and that Ohio State didn't deserve to win. And I remember watching a retrospective with Bo before he died, talking about that game. We just saw the intro, and he said at that moment, when that kicker went out to kick that ball, I was sitting there praying, you better miss that sucker. You guys don't deserve to win this game. He did. The football gods listened. He missed. And the Wolverines won, and Bo Schembechler walked off the field at the Horseshoe, carried on the shoulders of his players. Man, that intro, I can watch that on loop, bro. You know how many times I will watch that in an offseason? Let's just go grab that on YouTube just to watch that intro. My blood is pumping. My heart is beating. I'm ready. If you are not ready now for the season after watching that, well, something's wrong with you.
Combo formation. They go heavy. Parry the setback. Third down in inches. Parry. Touchdown, Michigan. Wolverines win it.
And now we are honored and pleased to be joined on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast by the voice of the Michigan Wolverines. Jim Brandstatter is our guest here. And Jim, my name is Steve Deace. It's really an honor to have you with us. How are you?
Steve, I'm glad to be with you guys, getting the start of another Michigan football season. I'm ready to go.
You know, you have been through so much over the years, over the decades with this program, and I mean that as an homage and not to date you because, listen, I just turned 44, Jim, so I'm in total midlife crisis mode, right? So I'm sensitive about it, okay? But, you know,
now, Steve,
yes.
Just to remember, 40 is the new 60.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
60 is the new 40. I don't know what the difference is, but 44 ain't old, believe me.
You know, I'm the nerd. I'm the geek that goes online and watches all the old games or the old Michigan, replays with you and Bo and Mo and Lloyd and during the offseason. It tied me over. And what we really wanted to talk to you today about was to sort of get a perspective about where this program is at in relationship to where it was in its halcyon days, how it's made so much progress already, and Coach Harbaugh is going into his third year, because you've had a front row seat for all of that, Jim, from the dawn of the Bo era to where we are now with Harbaugh. And so can you start with sort of just taking a step back to where was the program when Jim took over, and how has he gotten it to where he's gotten it so fast? I remember that first game against Utah, and the entire Fox crew was talking like, well, it's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 years before Michigan's a top 25 team again, and they finished that season with 10 wins. How did he do it, Jim?
Well, the one thing I would say, and a lot of people aren't sure about this, but I am. Brady Hoke left them with some pretty good talent. A lot of the guys that went on and were drafted last year, those are guys that Brady Hoke brought in the program, okay? So it's not like, Jim walked into an empty cupboard. But what he did was he brought an immediacy. He brought an attitude of, we will not accept losing games. We do not accept this. And you got to do that with a staff, and he brought in a great staff. And that attitude that he has of, I'm sorry, you go through practice and click along. You're gonna win. And the only way I know how to win is to work hard and play hard. And that's the way we're going to go about it. And if you're not ready to buy into that, we wish you well, and here's the door. And it's that kind of an attitude I think that Bo came in with, and everybody that is about Michigan, it is about the tradition, it is about the legacy that you leave to teams of the past. And Jim got that back. And the one thing was, in his first year, he went on the football bust. They have a football bust at the end of the year every year at Laurel Manor in Livonia, where 800 to 1,000 Michigan fans show up and honor the seniors, and the seniors get their names, which are, of course, given to them by the University of Michigan Club of Greater Detroit, the alumni club. And what Jim said when he got up there, he says, you know what about this year, what I feel we did? We got our integrity back.
Wow.
And that to me spoke volumes of what he felt was missing. That when we walked into a stadium, everybody knew it was Michigan, and that they better buckle up the chin strap and get ready to go, because it wasn't going to be easy. Attitude that he wanted to make sure that he got back. He did it in spades, and they won 10 football games. And the other thing I think that you give Jim Harbaugh credit for, he understands the modern day approach to how you do your business in college football, which includes recruiting, social media, and branding. All of those things, and he has been unbelievable at all three. He understands it. He thinks outside the box. And if you're a Michigan fan, you love the kinds of things he's doing. He will tweak everybody's nose out there, and he doesn't care. and I think the one thing you can look at in this offseason, name me a school, name me a football program that wouldn't want their coach handing the Pope a helmet and a pair of cleats from your university. Is there anything better than that? I don't know whether there is. And Jim Harbaugh is the guy that could pull it off.
What's funny is you mentioned some of that brand integrity that he's reestablished and the persona that he has established, which took a lot of pressure off the players and put it on him. And it's very Belichickian. Now Belichick's persona that he has crafted and presented is more curmudgeonly, not as charismatic as Jim's, but it's had the same effect. It's taken the pressure off of the New England Patriots players, and he's the focal point of the franchise on a daily basis, just as you see with Coach Harbaugh at Michigan. But behind some of those antics that you mentioned, or some of those outside the box moments like what we had with the Pope, people forget there is a really good, hardcore, old school football coach that still right now has one of the top 5 all-time winning percentage as a head coach in the National Football League. And I think that almost gets overlooked some, Jim. So when you're at practice, when you're around the team, do you see, yes, you see some of the new school stuff, the practicing on different fields so they can have, coaches get broken into like split squads for maximum amount of teaching and reps. But do you see those other characteristics of the best Michigan teams and the best times of Michigan football that you were around both as a player and an analyst as well?
No, there's no question. He likes to put the pads on and he likes to hit. That, if you walk around this country, isn't something that's done quite frequently at college campuses. It's certainly well. I mean, they don't put the pads on and they don't whack each other around every day. And Michigan doesn't do it as often as back when I played, but they still put the pads on and they will play and they will knock you around and they'll fall down and they'll go through live tackling drills. Those are the things that you talk old school about. I mean, the other thing you want to talk old school, you will see fullbacks and tight ends listed. And I defy you. Go look at some rosters around the country of spread teams, of Florida, of some of these other teams. You won't find a fullback or a tight end. And that's another thing that Jim is old school about. He's a football coach savant. The guy knows how to get it done. He believes in running the ball instead. He believes in having great athletes, and he believes in playing really, really good, hard-hitting, pressure defense. Those are, what he likes, and that's and that's the kind of coach he hired.
Talking with Jim Brandstatter, the voice of the Michigan Wolverines, here on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. So, Jim, as you assess this year's team, and the traditional paradigm has been, well, you have to take somewhat of a step back. You just can't replace all of these guys. And yes, a lot of the guys coming back here, they have 5 starters, but 9 other guys started at least one game. But still, it's so much turnover. This is going to be an 8-4, 9-3 kind of season, building towards next year. I mean, that's the conventional paradigm of how we've known college football for decades now. But Alabama, Clemson, Washington, Ohio State, those are the 4 teams in the playoff last year, Jim. All 4 of them in college football playoff games played at least 9 true freshmen and started a true freshman at offensive line. Does youth mean as much as it used to mean, Jim?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you get college football right now, and it's completely different than what you said the college football paradigm was. Yeah, you graduate a bunch of seniors, you bring in a bunch of young kids. It takes a year or 2. That's not the case anymore. Kids come out of college, kids come out of high school ready to play in college, and coaches know that, and coaches must play the best players. And if he gets a player that's out of high school that's better than the other guys, he's got to play him. And so I think it's a little different nowadays. I think college football, as we knew it back then, isn't the same way. You have to recruit every year, and you recruit the best recruiting class you can. If we didn't learn anything from Ohio State a few years back, then they had a bunch of kids and they went on to win a national title. It doesn't matter anymore. Age is important. You need experience. It's a blend, I think, that's more important. But young kids that can play, can play. I don't care what age they are. And some kids come out of college and they're more mature physically. Those kids, they need to be served. And I think Michigan's got a bunch of those kids this year that you will see play as true freshmen and contribute big time.
Being around this team during camp leading up to the season, what is something you've had a chance to notice or see about this team, Jim, that a lot of us that are just, following camp reports or the videos that mgoblue.com puts out, we just don't get that opportunity that you have seen? What would that be?
Well, the deal is you read things, and, again, you go back to the media, and what do people read? What do people say that are writing about Michigan? They say, well, they only got 1 starter back on defense. So what? What I see is a fast, aggressive, kind of multi-talented and multi-player group of guys that you will have guys in the secondary. You're going to need a program to know who's back there and what they're playing. But I'm telling you what, they can run, they can cover, and they're going to be aggressive. Up front, I don't think you need a worry in the world about losing Wormley or Taco Charlton or those guys. Winovich, Hurst, Brian Monet, Rashawn Gary, they're going to be just fine. That's what I noticed, okay, defensively. Offensively, the thing that I think strikes me are the receivers. You've got Jehu Chesson and Mara Darbo off to the NFL. You figure your job out. You may find that there are 2 or 3 freshmen playing and making just as big a plays as those guys did a year ago. And that's what I noticed, that it's going to be a fun year. It's going to be like Christmas morning because you're going to be opening up presents. You don't know what's in the present. It's going to be brand new, but it's going to be good. And I think that's what's going to be fun about this year. Some names that you haven't heard before are going to explode, and you're going to go, wow, where did that guy come from? And they're going to be the names for the next 2 or 3 years, and I think that's going to be great fun.
Final question for Jim Brandstatter, voice of the Michigan Wolverines. So, you covered Harbaugh as a player and now as a head coach. It seems to me, as I've watched him do interviews with BTN during training camp and some other places, he seems to be having a lot of fun. He seems to be really enjoying himself. Do you think he's a lifer at Michigan? Do you think, do you believe that, Jim?
Oh, I do. His parents have moved from Milwaukee They live like kitty corner from him in Ann Arbor. He takes his kids to school and drops them off at the same grade school he went to. He's the guy. He's sitting in the row of cars with all the moms, and he's in there with Jumpman fleece sweatshirt on.
Now, Jim, here's the important thing: is he doing it wrong, like Michael Keaton and Mr. Mom? Right? Does he drop him off? Does he follow the flow of traffic?
He's got it right. He's figured it out which way to go in the one-way lane and all. But and you know what? He would know that, because that's the other thing about Jim. He's one of the most competitive guys I know, and he would know where to line up in the row of cars, and he would know which direction they're going in. So, and he loves coaching Michigan, and he loves Michigan because it is, it's in his blood, it's in his DNA, and the fact that he's done so many interesting things there, and he's got a great mind in that he thinks outside the box and a lot of, and you know what? There are those out there that call him quirky, things like that, and I think he relishes that. Mm-hmm. I think he plays that up because they think he's a little quirky, but boy, when he lines up on Saturday and you got two tight ends, a fullback I formation, and he pounds the football, ain't nothing quirky about that. And so I think he relishes the idea that maybe some people think he's a little off center. But I'll tell you what, in regards to a coaching aspect, he is right on it.
Jim Brandstatter, voice of the Michigan Wolverines. Jim, between you, Bob Ufer, Frank Beckman, I mean, those are the voices that essentially have regaled me my entire life. Again, I'm paying homage. I'm not dating you, but that's an incredible legacy, brother. Thank you.
I appreciate it. And here's what I say to people, and I know that but it's one of those things where Bob Ufer was the voice of Michigan football, and he really created a unique personality and a unique deal, because back then it was a different time and place. And to me, there will be no other voice of Michigan football than Bob Ufer. I'm just keeping the chair warm. That's all. Bob Ufer was the guy.
Go Blue, Jim Brandstatter. It's been an honor. Let's do it again sometime. God bless you.
Absolutely. Give me a call. Talk to you soon.
All right. Take care. More of Michigan Podcast here in a moment.
Well, there's Antoine Winfield. All he needs to do is get over on the other side a little bit. Back goes Jackson. And they've got a problem. Still struggling. Now throws it. Intercepted. It went right to Andre Weathers. And Weathers will score a touchdown. Oh, that could be a will breaker. So Craig Baker had one blocked. That got him on the bench last week, and Feely comes right on this week and does the same thing. But here's the interception, the struggle, the eternal effort, trying to do more than you can. And he was in the grasp of Sam Sword, tried to deliver the ball, simply couldn't do it, and it went right into the stomach of Andre Weathers, who swallowed it.
Sometimes quarterbacks try to do too much.
Yep.
And now this week's Twitter poll results. For those of you that follow us on Twitter, at Michigan Podcast, we asked you, what was the best Michigan football season opener over the last 25 years? So going back to 1992, 19% of you said Washington in 2002. I just recently watched that game again. You recall Philip Brabs comes off the bench after shanking a couple of kicks early in the game and hits a clutch bomb as time expires for the Wolverines to beat the Huskies, coached by Rick Neuheisel. 23% of you said Colorado in 1997. Michigan was the last team to start the season in 1997, September the 13th. Colorado was ranked number 1 by Sporting News, and they were a preseason top 10 team. People were thinking Michigan's done, 4 straight 4-loss seasons. Wolverines opened a can 27-3, and that kind of launched that national championship season. And then we had a tie. Notre Dame in 1999, that's a tremendous game. That doesn't get enough run. Tom Brady, Drew Henson are sharing reps at quarterback. Brady leads a drive at the end to put Notre Dame over the top. To put Michigan over the top of Notre Dame. And then a game that I was at, actually, in 1995. At least that's the greatest fourth quarter of all time. That was the earliest Michigan start ever. August the 26th, 1995, the kickoff classic or pigskin classic, one of those games against Virginia, who came in with a couple guys you've heard of, Tiki Barber, Rondé Barber. They were considered a top 10, top 15 team that year. It was 17-0 Virginia, and it didn't feel like it was that close. And it was like 190 degrees in Ann Arbor that day. I actually started to leave the stadium with my buddy, thinking it's over. We decide, hey, let's get some AC over at the old trailer for the M-Den. Go check out the new Nike gear. That was the year that it actually debuted. So we go into as we're going into the trailer, we hear a loud roar. The fight song starts up, so we know Michigan scored. And my buddy and I look at each other and think, yeah, but it's too late now. And that's like your pity touchdown, so you don't get shut out. We go into the M-Den trailer, walk around for a while, get some AC, come back out. All of a sudden, we hear the fight song again as we're heading out the gate, meaning they scored again. My buddy and I look at each other and said, dude, we got to get back in there. And since we hadn't left the stadium yet, we went right back to our seats and got there in time to see Mercury Hayes catch that pass from Scott Dreisbach to finish off the greatest comeback at the time in Michigan football history. So I don't think you can go wrong with any of those 4 season openers. That's a tough list. I think that's why the vote was so split over those 4 games. And that brings us to this week's question of the week. And it comes from Matthew Aldridge, who says, I think the new safeties, Tyree Cannell and Josh Metellus, will be great. I think the corners are really the only part of this team that I'm worried about. Can Lavert Hill, David Long, Keith Washington really step forward enough to hold solid? Well, we learned yesterday, Matthew, that Keith Washington has decided to transfer. So it's down now to David Long, Lavert Hill, and some other guys. And that, to me, is the question of the team. I'm not saying that Michigan's a team without weakness other than the secondary, but I think the secondary is the only weakness that I am concerned has the potential to drag down the team as a whole. And thankfully, you look at our schedule. We're not playing a lot of teams that have really gifted passing games. Even in week 1, Florida has an open quarterback competition with 3 guys. We're going to have more on that here in just a moment, by the way, including some video you've got to see. But, Florida's got 3 guys. One's a redshirt freshman. One's a guy that, is your game manager in Luke Del Rio. And then you have Malik Zaire, who, as we've pointed out in previous podcasts, doesn't have a lot of game action and really isn't a West Coast offense quarterback. So that helps. The next 5 or 6 weeks, they're playing teams that are largely, underwhelming at quarterback. I think Brian Lewerke may do some things for Sparty this year, but that's another game Michigan could win. And that takes us to, at Indiana, Richard Legow, who I think is a pro prospect. Trace McSorley at Penn State, who I think is one of the better quarterbacks returning in college football. But now we're into almost the second half of the season, so that should give those young guys, Matthew, enough time to get their feet wet. But you're asking about the right unit. That's the unit I'm the most concerned about as well.
The box, too. All Big Ten. A little muddle by Michigan. And inside the 5 is Bellamy. Dave Pearson with the snap to Ronald Bellamy.
26, Kyle Johnson.
Ronald Bellamy, the wide receiver, has moved in as if to be a single wing blocking back.
Trickeration, is that what they call it? He takes the snap. Right there, it looks like he's going to hand the ball off, and he just kind of lingers and then comes right up the gut.
Oh, what a beautifully executed. Hayden Fry calls them exotics.
All right, finally, now I mentioned this a couple of minutes ago. I teased it. This is some video you have got to see. All right, now, for those of you that are listening on the audio podcast, what we're showing is video from Florida practice taken by, or at least I don't know if it's taken by a Florida State fan, but it's from his Twitter account that this video is being disseminated. And these are the Gators. This is Florida's practice. These are Florida's quarterbacks. And let's just say that's Malik Zaire there. They're looking a tad below average. Okay? This can't be true. I mean, well, let me not go all Alex Jones here, okay? I think the video is true. It's the actual team. These are the actual players, but that can't be real time, can it? I mean, this now clever snark for a Florida State fan to edit together the most unimpressive video of Florida's new quarterbacks, including the old one, Luke Del Rio, that he could come up, right? So I'll give him, snark props and points for that. But this can't have happened all in real time. This can't be an actual full practice. This has to be certain plays, right? Right? Hell, if I was Jim McElwain, I'd put that video out myself. I'd start po-boying it. lowering expectations, get Michigan, feeling a little overconfident with the intention of trying to, ambush them here on September the 2nd. But that video, if you're a Florida fan, yikes. Guess we'll find out at Jerry's World here in a couple of weeks. That's right, next week, when we come back on the Michigan podcast, game week. Can you believe it? It's here already. Don't forget, you can help support the program via Patreon. Search Michigan Podcast on Patreon. If you are one of our team club members, you're going to get access to my exclusive point spread picks, our exclusive game day reaction podcast as well. Or if you just want to help us out, you like what we do, we greatly appreciate that. Subscribe via Google, iTunes, Stitcher as well. Right here on YouTube, click like this video, subscribe to our channel. Go Blue, and God bless. We'll see you next week.